Good evening, everyone. My name is Neelu Tao, and I'm on the board for AITPLA, and I have Roger with me tonight. So we both are going to be facilitating this event together today. And we both want to welcome you all on behalf of AITPLA for joining tonight's event.
Good evening.
I'd like to say a few words about the AITP board. We've got a very committed board this year. Rick Peterson, our president, is also our resident Zoom expert, although he's not attending tonight. He's been keeping the chapter moving ahead. He's also our publicity chair, maintaining a consistent message across our channels. Neelu Tao, who you've all met, is our programs co-chair, and she's been focused on our members' experience, not only providing program content, but also she's been identifying new ways to increase member interaction and build the value of our membership. By the way, it's only $55 a year, so consider joining. She's also, as you know, playing a critical role tonight as co-facilitator of the webinar. We also have Greg Klinner, who's our technology director, who keeps our website current, and he's been adding new technologies which provide a richer member experience. And then there's Carol Schlocker, also working on programs, and Mitch Matsumura, who has been our VP. So as many of you know, AITP is Association of Information Technology Professionals. We've been around for a long time. And our focus is on keeping members abreast of trends and best practices in managing technology, and also providing strong networking opportunities. And with the virtual meetings, we're slowly getting better at the networking opportunities. We're part of a national organization, a network of chapters across the country. And if you're a member of our chapter, you're welcome at any other chapter meeting. So as you know, we're suspending our in-person events until we're permitted again, but our events will be published on our website, aitp-la.org. So tonight, we're welcoming, it's an annual event. We're welcoming chief technology officers sharing the latest tech trends in our increasingly virtual world. We have a great lineup of speakers, and we're featuring Tony Carr as moderator. We're fortunate to have Tony lead this annual event. He's done this for several years, and he has achieved fame in several areas. He runs a successful development firm, TechEmpower, which builds projects from mobile initiatives to e-learning. He functions as a temporary CTO for firms with such needs. He's also the co-founder of the LA CTO Forum, the largest group of CTOs in the US. And he's equally well known in our chapter for producing our weekly e-zine, the Information Technology Zone. It's a free weekly email with curated, customizable content, and you can subscribe to it free on our website, which again is aitp-la.org. And this is done through another of Tony's firms, Aggregage. So now I'd like to turn over the program to Dr. Tony Carr.
Great, thanks for the intro, Roger. Are we gonna actually? Well, here, while we're in this mode, I'm gonna do the intros of my fellow presenters, and then hopefully we can switch over to the video grid view during the session. So let me first introduce Vijesh Mehta. He's the CTO and co-founder of Easy Texting. He's had a long career, starting out at a grid computing lab and then continuing on to Xerox. He founded Easy Texting in 2004, and he's guided the company in the technology forward since then. It's used by many Fortune 500 companies today. Actually, Jesh, could you maybe just talk briefly to what your company does?
Sure, yeah. So Easy Texting is a text messaging company. We allow businesses to communicate with their customers in an effective way. And lately with COVID, this has been a pretty popular thing, and so we've seen a pretty big increase with a lot of businesses asking, "Hey, how do I text my customers?" They're really asking me, "How do I communicate via text?" And so this is exactly what we do. We allow customers to do promotions via text. We allow customers to do conversations via text, and additional things like notifications and things like that. And all of it's run via a web-based platform, including APIs, and through all the different carriers all over the US.
Awesome. Next up is Bill Parducci. He's heads up both engineering and product for ACE Metrix. And before joining ACE, Bill was CTO for Passenger, an industry-leading provider of collaboration software. And he's been around as the technical lead at several LA-based startups. And similarly, Bill, can you give a kind of a snapshot of what you guys do at ACE?
Sure. At ACE Metrix, what we do is we test advertising creative. So it's not the distribution or the eyeballs that hit it. It's how the creative is being responded to by people who watch the advertising. So we work with people who provide us ads that are captured in television or online, and we run them out into a set of surveys to create some syndicated data that we can sell back into national brands. We also take that and extend it to any kind of private testing they want to do or specialized testing, et cetera. And in the last 5 years, we've been really relying upon a lot of freeform data, which now have begun. We had spent the last 4.5 years really diving into semantic analysis and being able to try and capture the emotions that people feel when they view the advertising.
Awesome. Thanks, Bill. Appreciate you being part of it. And last but not least, Thor Clark, who is the CTO at Well Health. They're a 150-person startup. And he's got a really broad experience. It's fun to go on his LinkedIn profile and see all the different things he's done. But it's always leading engineering and product teams in public and private companies. He's got a few exits under his belt as a technical co-founder or an early employee. And before joining Well, he was CTO at TigerText, which is a clinical communications solution. Although you're going to hear some parallels to that, I guess, when you Well Health is described. And before that, probably a lot of us know Barracuda Networks. He was a VP of engineering there. So Thor, can you tell us a bit about Well Health?
Yeah, happy to. Well Health serves healthcare systems, primarily in the provider space, although we do a little bit of work with payers, focused on the enterprise healthcare space, academic healthcare organizations and large healthcare organizations, like Cedars-Sinai, Memorial Care, NYU Langone, Vanderbilt, and a wide number of other providers. And we're really focused on managing patient communication. So just managing that kind of last mile of patient communication via email, SMS text, secure messaging, and phone, and really just ensuring that an individual patient has a great customer support experience with the healthcare system, whether that's rescheduling an appointment or asking a question about medication or ensuring that they're doing proper follow-up after a procedure. We manage all of that communication in a bi-directional fashion for these large healthcare systems.
Awesome. So Roger, can you switch to the grid view? So stop sharing. Perfect. Okay. So the way, and actually, Roger, by the way, the first one of these I did was in 2010. So we've been doing them together for 10, well, maybe this is the 11th year then. And these are always really fun conversations for me because this is a conversation I'd want to have over beers with these three gentlemen to just kind of talk about different topic areas of what's changed for us over the past couple of years. That's basically how we set up the conversation. And so we're going to be ranging through a whole bunch of different topics, and it's going to go by a little fast and furious. Now, we're very lucky. We've got a few other CTOs in the audience today. And so as you have questions or use terms that you're not familiar with, fire those away in chat. But honestly, so I can lock in on the conversation, I'm going to be ignoring chat until we get to like break points. But maybe, you know, if you know, Todd, Salim, Alex, you know, you've got a quick answer for people on what are they talking about on this, that would be awesome. If you could field a couple of those in chat while we're doing it, that'd be great. Actually, and one thing, for those of you who have a camera, really appreciate having, you know, bright smiling faces in front of us. Makes you feel more like you're not talking to a blank wall. So I really would appreciate having cameras on. So awesome. Okay, with that, we're going to dive into our first topic. And our first topic is machine learning and data science. And obviously, this is a very fast evolving area. And so, Bill, maybe you could start us off and talk a little bit about kind of what you guys are doing in that area and kind of how things have been changing for your organization and from a technology standpoint.
Sure. So, like I said, we've been, for a number of years, we've been collecting verbatims, which are free-form text responses to surveys. And one of the things that, you know, in the early days, we all remember probably things like word clouds and other visual representations that counted phrases or determined, you know, what the frequency was of different things. But as time started to evolve in the industry, semantic language analysis started picking up. And by that, what it really is it's the diving into free-form text, trying to identify different types of signal, and then using tools to determine what kind of correlations you have between those things you've identified and what the causality is behind it. So when we first started doing this, we were using some of the early open source tools, but what they're allowing us to do is look for responses of things like funny or sadness or heartfelt or hate. There's many things that can come out. We've identified 57 emotions right now. We're still building our list, which we refer to as emos. And in our emos, we've also found very interesting correlations between the things that people are saying. So what does that mean to us as a business? As a business, where that's been very valuable for us is that we have advertisers pushing out multiple versions of the same ad or different types of campaigns, and they want to know how they're being received, obviously because they're investing a lot of money into it. So instead of asking only questions that are very specific to, do you like this? Do you not like this? You know, would you be willing to buy it? We say, what do you think about it? What would you like to tell the advertiser? And from there, we're able to come in and condense this information down into something where we can say, look, out of all the ads we've tested, and there's been 80,000, 100,000 plus, you're in the top 10% of ads that made people happy or sad or hungry or a variety of different things. And that's become very powerful for us. It's the same kind of techniques that have been used by many others, but as time goes on, we're learning that the tools that are available are improving dramatically as well. So right now what we're doing is we're trying to upgrade into what we call our V3 package of this, and that's using some of the open source tools that have been available from companies like Google and Facebook with their BERT and Roberta products, which are incredibly powerful in terms of being able to help you develop signal. So that's kind of the background of where we are with this. I'm happy to go into different details depending on the levels of interest.
Cool. That's awesome, Bill. So Thor, how about for you guys, kind of give us a sense of some of the things you're doing and maybe a little bit of sense of, you know, how is this different over the past couple of years?
Yeah, well, yeah, as you can imagine, it's a huge area of focus for us. So we, you know, of all of the communication we manage, about 80% of it's automated. You know, I think the thing that, you know, one of the things I find interesting about it is actually how much you can do with which is kind of basic pattern matching and pattern recognition. And so that's obviously a very powerful tool. We are, you know, heavily invested in some of the machine learning capabilities. And a lot of that is, you know, to be blunt, it's just assessing the various kind of tools and solutions that are out there, right, across like AWS and kind of open source and things like that. And then we also have a little bit of an additional lens on it just from a compliance standpoint, you know, in terms of PHI and PAI, and that does constrain us a little bit and you know, helps, you know, keeps us focused to a certain extent on some things we can just do, you know, quote unquote on-prem in our local environments. But I would really second, what Bill had mentioned just around the advances that we've seen in kind of what's available, and not just with other, with some of these big cloud providers and the capabilities that they're offering, but now, you start to see a lot of kind of smaller startups who are really going deep on an ontology for kind of a specific industry, or, even sometimes kind of a health condition, and starting to think about partnering with them and consuming, some of that, consuming some of those services. So it's a great time to be in the space. I think if you're kind of dealing with free text and really, wanting to consume it and take action on it, determine semantic intent. I do feel, I was as an undergrad in the mid '90s, and, we're just kind of starting to talk about, and then kind of your machine learning, coursework, just starting to talk about what might be possible and kind of syntactic, parsing and things like that. And I feel it's just now that we're really starting to see all of those capabilities really flourish. And, kind of the promise that we talked about back then, you can really start to see it starting to work now.
Yeah, it's funny actually. So I was an undergrad in the early '80s, and then sort of through mid '80s, and AI was huge, and natural language processing was huge then, and then kind of like fell into major disfavor, and then had another wave, and so and now finally it is like real. So I think it's interesting to hear both of you talking about that and the tooling. Vijesh, how about for you?
Yeah, we've had different experiences with machine learning, but probably not as extensive as William and Thor. I think, a lot of our texting kind of software is very much deterministic, but the cool stuff that we did was we did some AI and machine learning in compliance, and also with making sure that people are doing safe messaging. And this ended up being a pretty big part for us. So first of all, like analyzing text for, words that may be phishing or scam related or something like that is very important. Like, we cannot have anything on our system that we don't like, right? We want to have really high quality traffic on our system. So we have lots of extensive tools to analyze text messages and make sure that those text messages are not in any way harmful to anybody, in any way, like, not, for instance, like if a bunch of people get texts and a lot of people say, hey, I don't want this anymore, like, it's a really interesting indicator for us, right? Like, we start saying, hey, people are opting out of receiving this text. So very quickly we start flagging those accounts that have high opt-out rates or low reply rates, or all of a sudden you have text message content that has illegal words. Like, if any bank is mentioned, you pretty much have a flag on there, right? Like, it's probably something going on, right? So a lot of our AI is actually very compliance related, right? We just use that for that. But some of the software we use, I know these guys talked about tools and stuff, but I found SIF Science to be a really great tool for us. We've been feeding a lot of our information into SIF Science, and they do a great job of helping us with determining if the customer is a real customer, or if it's possibly a fraudulent customer, or somebody that's just messing around on our website. It's nice for us to be able to use that for kind of just checking to see if accounts are the right type of accounts. All right, so that helps us as far as the funnel and onboarding part goes. And then when it comes to the actual text messaging part, we actually analyze it for any fraudulent behavior. So that's kind of the level at which we're using AI currently. There's a few other things we're really excited to look into. For instance, timing is really important in our business, right? Like, what's the right time to tell somebody, hey, your package is ready, right? And these are things that we actually learn based on behavior, right? So if we have a bunch of retail customers, we actually check to see when they text, if there's replies, that means there's a lot more engagement, then those are times that are actually beneficial to them. And so we highlight those areas. So between this hour and this hour, you get the highest replies from your customer base. And so we encourage you to send messages during that time. And those are the ways we help our customers actually get better at communicating with their clients at the end too. So that's kind of the picture that we have with AI and machine learning. It really helps our product, really helps our compliance areas. And we've been using really great tools out there.
That's awesome. So when you're describing understanding what sort of a bad text message is, part of it sounded like it was just signal based on seeing people, reporting it or whatever. So kind of a classic sort of email spam kind of approach. But I'm guessing that you also can, based on human flag things over time, you could have it learn what an incoming thing is to be proactive about it. Is that true?
Very much, yeah. Yeah, so we've been using, actually Safe Science has been doing some content analysis for us, and we've actually built a massive database of somewhere around over 500 million text messages that we put in there, where we flagged it. These are things that we know are fraudulent, not acceptable. These are things that we know are healthy, and the machine learning algorithm basically learned based on our data, right? So I'm not sure about William and Thor, like having no information to learn from is probably one of the more challenging aspects, right? I know there's like gamed AI where you can have like one system battle another and try to determine an outcome, right? But I don't know if there's been much success there. I mean, for us, it's very, very pragmatic. We have to operate a business, and we have some very key measurable goals, right? We want less spam. We want anybody that's sending anything that's illegal or not okay, or to automatically be blocked, right? And so for us, it's very simple, and we built a really great algorithm, with Safe Science that learned off of existing data, which is great because we actually have really high accuracy, right? We have pretty confident scores, like 90% sure this text is bad, right? And we're pretty sure at that point that, hey, with that kind of confidence level, we might as well just stop that message from going out automatically. No human has to really review.
Yeah, and Thor, I'm curious, from your perspective on data, was it much of a problem for you guys to have good sort of source data to work off of, or how did you address that?
Yeah, well, if I could, it was so fun to hear Vijesh's description. Early on in our company history, when we were very small, today we have direct relationships with all the major carriers, and we don't really kind of run into any of the filtering or anything like that. But early on, we definitely did, and so it's fun to kind of hear the perspective from the other side, because we ran into, when we were trying to send messages to patients on behalf of providers and healthcare organizations, we ran into those exact same, essentially machine learning trained filters that Vijesh has described, and be like, why did that message not go through and this one did? And so anyway, fun to hear it kind of from the other perspective on that topic. But yeah, I think there was another question from someone we were in the breakout room with about what's the way to get people excited about data, and the one thing that also came to mind, Tony, was just clean data. Like that is, if you kind of you've got someone new to the opportunities around data, and you give them a huge set of data that's just a mess that's going to take them a significant amount of time to clean up and deal with. It can just destroy, that kind of sense of enthusiasm. For us, some of our data is very clean, right? And then some of it, interestingly, as we kind of think about, working with large healthcare providers, healthcare data is so interesting. It's so complicated, and it is varied across provider organizations. And it also varies over time. It's not like the stock market, where you might just say, well, there's a constrained set of parameters when you're kind of looking at a, stock price and trends over time and so on. Healthcare data, tomorrow there could be a new lab or a new test result, or a, even kind of a new level of specificity around a test result that really matters. And no one's going to care that makes all the work you've done cleaning up the data for the last 10 years less valuable, So it's a very complicated space from that perspective. So it's a very interesting challenge from a data perspective.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, I just peeked over. Carolyn asked, just wondered if using GANs and difficulties surrounding the technology. I'm not sure I know what GANs is. So, Carolyn, actually, do you want to pop in and just, if that's a question related to data science, machine learning, do you want to just tell us what that is?
Sorry, I was trying to get myself unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So it's about, it's called general adversarial networks. I thought maybe somebody might be using it, where you're using data that resembles your training data to help increase the accuracy of your machine learning. I just wondered if anyone in this group was using it and had anything to share about that.
No,
It might be that than text oriented.
Okay. Well, if anybody in the audience has had experience, please respond to Carolyn. Sorry about that, Carolyn. We got a whiff on our one and only question in this area. So, okay. Actually, so Steve's asking a question: Does HIPAA impact? Well, he's saying data access. Certainly, it impacts data access. But I'm assuming, how do you do data science when you're dealing in a HIPAA world?
It has a yes. 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 Yeah. No. It's huge. You know, as I mentioned before, it really does constrain for our use cases. It constrains the set of you know, kind of external tools and capabilities. And I would say both from just a HIPAA perspective in terms of just is it HIPAA, you know, as a service HIPAA eligible, which is one question, and then also just practically, you know, does that third-party service kind of meet our security controls regardless of whether they're, you know, HIPAA eligible or not? But yes, no, it's very meaningful. I do think it's interesting. You know, I think in a way, if these kind of data trends, you know, continue and the GDPR approach, you know, starts to kind of come into, you know, come into the U.S. at some level. We see that a little bit in California already. I do perceive that some of the things we have to deal with from a HIPAA perspective are going to become, you know, going to impact other industries as well. But a huge impact, yes. Something.
Although
the reason I ask
okay, go ahead, Steve.
is I'm involved in a startup. One of the things that we're doing is we are collecting a lot of data, and that data is going to be of interest to many different constituencies. We can sell access to it, but we need to protect the identity of the patients that contributed to the data. And I'm just kind of curious, is there anybody that's down the road on this in terms of making sure that it can be done? Or is it still kind of in open flow?
Yeah, I can speak to that, you know, kind of briefly, or I could take the next hour on it. So kind of your
well, maybe we can take
why
it
don't you just
offline.
talk about, I mean, because we're sort of the golden age of de-identified data, right,
Yeah.
for these purposes. So do you want to just kind of briefly mention what you do, and Vijesh, maybe you chime in as well?
Yeah, no, of course. So there's there's a regulatory framework called Safe Harbor that provides a very explicit kind of de-identification method that lets you maintain each individual row of patient data, but it's very explicit about kind of what data types need to be pulled out, what can be aggregated, at what level it can be aggregated, and so on. I would say practically, you know, we go well beyond that because, just to be blunt, you know, that framework was put in place, you know, some years ago, and the level of sophistication you kind of see in the marketplace right now, where people are able to source a lot of data from different sources and kind of tie it all together. You know, so we stick pretty exclusively just to an aggregate model, so we don't have any individual rows left at all. But the Safe Harbor framework is that's a regulatory framework that's out there and very well documented for that topic.
Josh, how about you?
No, I didn't have much more than that.
Okay.
I was just going to say Safe Harbor is a big part of it. And also there's different areas, different companies have different needs. You know, I think for us, because of texting, we actually function more as a conduit as opposed to like it's heavily regulated HIPAA. So we have kind of enough like wiggle room that we can basically eliminate past records, and that's sufficient. But there's some competing concerns for us where communication is required to be held for a certain number of years. Right, and so we're required to hold all communication information, the from number, the to number, and all of that information. And so there is personally identifying information in our databases, but we try to remove everything that has to do with the message. We obfuscate all of that stuff, and we function more as a conduit as opposed to, you know, full HIPAA requirements.
Which is kind of the whole trick to it, right? You can de-identify stuff very easily, where there's an ID that you can never figure out who the individual is, and from a data science perspective, you don't care, right? You can still do all of your analysis off of that de-identified data, and it's completely unimportant, and you never actually do want to even tie it back to the individual. You just want to know how much signal you can get out of there, right? So it's actually, that has become super easily solved these days. It is so much easier to deal with, you know, creating a data set for, well, for your testing environment or for data science group or whatever that protects you from those things. And there's well-known models, as Thor was mentioning. Okay, so I have basically one job today, and that's to try to keep us a little bit on track relative to time. And I am already failing. So, and my last name Carr is actually Swiss German. It's like Smith in the German part of Switzerland. And the one thing we're known for is timeliness. So, so I will try to do a better job here, but we're gonna move on. And we're gonna talk about another area that has seen sort of remarkable changes, and that's in the area of well, DevOps, cloud providers, et cetera. And so, Thor, I'm going to ask you to start this one off and just kind of talk about your approach right now to thinking about, you know, cloud providers and the services that they provide, and kind of, you know, maybe a little bit about what you're doing from a DevOps perspective, just so we can kind of get a sense of what you guys are doing.
Sure. Yeah. So we're maintaining today a multi-cloud environment for a variety of reasons. You know, I would say, as just kind of speaking from a vendor perspective, and I showed this story with Tony a few days ago. You know, it was probably not more than 3 or 4 years ago where I was in sales calls, kind of representing the technology and the platform side of the system, and in the healthcare space, and AWS would be a negative. You know, I actually had a very large healthcare system require that we commit in the contract that if they ever asked us to, we would bundle up our cloud service and put it on a server and ship it to them so they could put it in their data center. So they had that kind of level of kind of requirement and control around their infrastructure. And now I'd say, you know, probably less than 4 or 5 years later, I couldn't imagine hearing that. You know, AWS, even in the healthcare industry, is generally a positive. You know, the one, and at Barracuda, of course, we had a very strong kind of on-prem component, right? It shipped a lot of boxes and that type of thing. And the one area where I think that may, retain for quite some time is, you know, the kind of hedge fund space, right? Where practically speaking, they just want that data somewhere where they can really control it and control access. You know, I think we are focused, I mentioned machine learning. So we really do think hard about what are the value add services that these cloud providers are making available. And that's a significant area of focus for us from just an engineering investment standpoint, assessing, testing, and looking at which services might be appropriate for us as we kind of build out new product capabilities. So we make a significant investment there. So, you know, obviously with AWS, we've got Comprehend, you've got SageMaker, that kind of machine learning pipeline tool. So, you know, we spent a lot of time assessing those. Yeah, and then I think, yeah, anything else, Tony, you'd like me to?
No, I think that's good. I do want to loop back to you because I know you're doing some interesting things kind of from an infrastructure as code perspective, and there's been some questions about that in the chat already. But Bill, maybe we could, you could share a bit about what you guys are doing and kind of any perspective change around how you're tackling, you know, cloud these days as compared to a few years ago.
Sure. First, to Thor's point, things like hosting on AWS and the change in perception on that, in so many different ways, it's amazing right now. We used to have, we still have SLAs in place for all sorts of outages, et cetera. And the only time we're never questioned on them or want the report, et cetera, is when Amazon has an outage that affects a large number of people, and you tell them Amazon's having an issue, and everyone's like, oh yeah, of course. I mean, it's, all right, well, I guess that's my report. We're a hybrid setup, so we rely upon Amazon and Google for a lot of different services. We don't host any machines there, even though we're a Kubernetes and virtual machine setup across most of our environment. We find that just for us, the cost analysis of having access, particularly to our GPUs, all of my guys doing the hardcore semantic analysis stuff are killing me for these GPU boxes, which are not cheap. And no matter what I buy, it's never as big as it should have been. So from that standpoint, I'm keeping those things tied to earth because I'm not going to give Amazon $10,000 an hour to run them or whatever ridiculous amount it is. So what that does do is we have to have a pretty strong VPN set up between the two for our communications to go back and forth. Most of our dev is still up there, but all of our R&D is local. And that also helps in terms of these guys, for whatever reasons, need to sling around, you know, many gigabyte files continuously up and down, and it was killing us trying to do that to S3, et cetera. So we did kind of hit that optimization point where the services make sense. AWS S3 is amazing in terms of durability. One of my early startups was a company that worked with queuing, and that's just fantastic for us in terms of being able to depend on their queue being there. Google's been exposing some really cool stuff in terms of transcriptions, being able to do a variety of things where you're able to use their tools to inspect things to get back information about them. Even one in our world, since there are a lot of celebrities involved in advertising, we're actually starting to play with their beta right now. Who can tell you who the celebrity was within, or if there was a celebrity in something that you looked at, which is very interesting as well. And then finally, it's kind of changed the way we do backups, because now a lot of the data that we keep up in S3, they have the concepts of going to deep freezes and multiple version retention and things like that. And so we're not, you know, sitting here stacking tapes somewhere and having them drive them off to a vault like the old days. It's much more real time. And also along those lines, one of the things we take advantage of is the time to live stuff in Amazon. So we'll throw stuff up there. We say in 13 months it's gone, so we put a lot of logs and things that we may have to go through for troubleshooting, et cetera, and then just wipe our hands. We know in 13 months it's gone. And that's been very powerful for us, actually. It's very simple and small, but when you realize, you know, all the logic you used to have like on rotations of things, and, you know, now we have to get rid of it, and it has to be destroyed properly. And again, you tell somebody, yeah, Amazon expired it, they don't ask you, did they do a good job, right? It's gone, right? It's vapor. So it has been a good move in terms of doing that, but we are not by any means fully invested 100% in the clouds, because I frankly can't afford what it would cost for the kind of analysis we do.
So Bill, I'm curious, where are you putting your big GPU machines?
The GPU boxes I keep in the office, actually.
Wow.
We have,
okay.
Oh yeah, yeah. I have, I don't know, 150 amps of power here.
Okay.
I have a data room. It's on its own AC. I got a gigabit access to the world, and it's got quite a bit of UPS backup. And I keep it there. I feel better about it too.
Wow, I'm so glad we had you on the panel, because that's such a rarity now. And
I'm the last one.
I mean, yeah, you're the guy. We found you.
Well, the other thing too is those GPU boxes eat like 8U, and so I mean, it's just one of those things where it just, you know, in a really nice colo location, it doesn't make sense for us to put them in there. I just keep that down to blades.
Well, have any of you guys walked through a colo location recently?
Yep.
It is a wasteland, unless they are providing service to one of the big cloud providers.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it's a wasteland. It's shocking. We've gone through. So, Vijesh, actually, I want you to go a slightly different direction here, and talk about, well, first of all, probably there's a portion of the crowd who won't know quite what DevOps is. So explain a little bit of what DevOps is, but
Right.
then you're actually kind of, you know, we were talking ahead of time, you're kind of going to sort of the next evolution of that. And so I'd really love you to talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. So we've been kind of going through a process of rethinking how DevOps and how, you know, system administrators and how all of them function in our company. You know, and so just as a general description, DevOps is a group of people that are going to operationally maintain the infrastructure, and they also are able to write code and orchestration for all these machines. Right. So that's what I expect my DevOps team to do. And so, you know, we for a long time, you know, we hired DevOps people that weren't really programmers. There were people who knew Linux really well, they knew Bash scripting really well, they could spin up servers, they could get things running. And we were actually in the data center, and we still have a little bit in a data center that we're trying to get moved over, you know, and so there's a little bit there, you know, but, you know, I think we approach this thing in a different way, right? And one of the things that's interesting is kind of the SRE movement that Google has been pushing recently. And it feels like this is kind of the more kind of implementation of DevOps, the more formal implementation DevOps. And we're kind of starting to adopt that. And there's a process to get there. You know, obviously a lot of the existing engineers and stuff we have are not they're not programmers. And one of the key things we need to do as an SRE is make sure the talent is a programming talent, right? So somebody who can program. And the idea here is that we want to get all of our infrastructure to become code. And if we can make it code, then it's really easy for us to use all of the cloud providers like AWS, Google Cloud, and spin up what we need and spin down what we need. And it's great because we can actually do it as we need it, right? And all of it's code, which means we can rely on it. All of it is tested code so that we know if things are working well or not. And it's a great way to go about it, right? And I kind of want to go through the process of us getting there, right? So how do I take a team that's not really an SRE and how do I make them an SRE? Right, or SRE team, right? And so this is kind of an evolution of process, right? And first I start off with what I call just deep visibility, right? I would like deep visibility within my system. And so we look at observability, we looked at metrics and monitoring, we look at alerting and escalation process. And those things represent kind of the deep visibility portion of our system. And I expect our team to basically create a whole process around these things, right? So make sure all of our systems are monitored, make sure all the business processes are monitored, make sure the alerts are actually functioning, make sure there's an escalation process within the team that actually works as well. All of these things are kind of foundational. It really builds the idea that we're seeing what's going on in our system. Very quickly after that, we move over to something called rapid delivery, right? And rapid delivery is kind of the next phase of what I want my team to approach. And the goal here is to take the software that we have in the development environment and make sure that it's able to get to production really fast without lots of manual things going on, without taking the system down. Hopefully, you kind of want to get to the point where you have continuous integration and continuous deployment. That's kind of the holy grail of where we want to be. Right, and so that's another process that we're like spinning up and making sure the team goes from deep visibility all the way to rapid delivery. And once we get to that rapid delivery portion, then we start thinking about how do we make it cloud first, right? And so cloud first technology, the idea is, okay, we want to make sure that all of our infrastructure is code. And so one of the technologies we're using is Terraform. And so using Terraform and along with Ansible, we're able to basically use the idea of having these systems that basically configured, make sure that they're configured via code, which is great because now we can actually watch our stuff in production just as software, right? And you can actually see basic software practices. It's great to see, hey, versioning. It's great to see unit tests. It's great to see your builds running. You want a green light, builds are great. You want to see all this stuff in production going that way as well. So this is kind of the evolution we've been following to build the SRE model. And also along the way, we're adding talent in our team to make sure that the talent is the prototype SRE talent. So we want people that are great SREs to come in and also help our existing DevOps engineers and system administrators get to where they need to be for an SRE. And all of this is designed around Scrum teams. And so, give a team a mission and try to drive them toward the goal. And so that's kind of the transition process we've been using. And it's been fun, a lot of amazing technologies out there and great stuff to really move the business.
That's great. And I will say, so, and actually you're using the term SRE. Can you just define what SRE is really quickly? Yeah. At least first say what the acronym means and then define it just a hair.
Yeah, it's a site reliability engineer, right? And SREs generally are people who are able to understand how your infrastructure is running. They understand how the infrastructure can be orchestrated in code, right? So being able to deploy something in Google Cloud using just the APIs, making sure that the virtual machine spins up, all of that, all via code. We usually a click button. We use Jenkins currently. So within Jenkins, we just click a button and it automatically releases our stuff. And so that's currently how I've set it up. But it's been great, and I think, in general, SRE kind of evolves the system administrator concept to basically get to the point where you're utilizing all of these services online just with their APIs. Because, I mean, they've provided such great tools and utilities that you can pretty much do almost all of this stuff, all via code, and it's all really deterministic and testable, which is great.
Yeah, and one thing I actually want to point out that kind of gets lost in the, all of this conversation. There's actually really cool stuff. We'll come back to infrastructure as code because I know, Thor, you're doing some interesting stuff there too. But the systems we're working on these days, I think, are far more complex than they were even just a few years ago, because you have all of these sort of different technologies available to you, serverless, you're connecting to all of these third-party systems. The data you're collecting is far more voluminous, and you're grabbing it from all sorts of additional sources. You've got all these parts running around all over the place that you can just spin up through code. So the complexity is just so much higher and so many more failure points. So having visibility into it, having people specifically responsible for the reliability of it, that's become just critical to our jobs, because it's so much harder to deliver a successful system when you've got all these pieces rolling around. You cannot deliver it sort of in old school patterns. So
That's
I think
a very good point. You know, Tony, one of the things that I always tell my team is if there's a checklist, you know, it probably can be done in code.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yep.
a lot of times, you know, if there's manual deployments or something like that, you have like a 15-point checklist, you know, make sure this happens, you know, an engineer told me to run a script I was supposed to run. These are all things that could be a mistake. And very quickly they become mistakes as you start scaling. And so I like to just have it in code.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So Thor, talk a little bit about what you guys, I know you're doing a lot from an infrastructure as code perspective.
Yeah, we are. And I think, you know, you make a great point about the complexity of systems these days. And I would say, you know, I perceive it to be non-trivial. You know, really, I think there's a tremendous opportunity there. You know, kind of that end point is a tremendous opportunity. Getting there in our experience is just non-trivial. You know, and I'm not sure I believe that it's a really mature space. You know, I mean, you've got Terraform, you've got some of these other things out there. It still feels to me like we're finding our way to kind of what the end solution is going to be on those topics. And it's not something where I can just kind of bring, you know, someone in or bring a team in and say, hey, just take a look at our environment, you know, and code it up for me. And let's get rolling, you know, like the interplay between kind of that infrastructure as code layer and then your actual application and your microservices and then all of the other, you know, kind of the external servers and the serverless stuff. It's non-trivial. That said, it's just a huge opportunity. You know, I wrote my first, you know, my first program I ever wrote was an assembly language. And so, you know, from assembly to C and Python and like this natural progression. And, you know, see the same thing with servers. You know, it's so fun to be able to hear your story. I had a data room, you know, once upon a time, you know, managing the AC and that whole thing. And then, you know, data rooms, and then it's, okay, it's a server farm somewhere. And then it's, you know, and it's VMs and containers and all this stuff. And it's like this abstraction layer has been really fun, you know, in my career to just kind of observe how those layers of abstraction have grown. And I think infrastructure as code is the next one. I just would say, you know, for us, we are using Terraform, and we are, you know, we're on that path, and we're committed to it. And it's, I would just say it's non-trivial. Personally, it's kind of been my experience with it.
Yeah,
it's a real investment.
It sounds so good in theory, and then in practice, it's always more challenging than that. And it's relatively new, all of this area. So Todd asked a really good question back to sort of the reliability questions. And there's a great book called Accelerate out there, which has a set of metrics, you know, KPIs for how you think about this world, right? So, you know, a release frequency, you know, change failure rates, lead time to recovery, et cetera. And I guess I'm curious, Bill, maybe we'll start with you. Are you using some of those metrics in order for you to be able to understand how you're doing from a delivery standpoint relative to these areas?
Not really. Our primary metrics are really, excuse me, measured as uptime across all the microservices and all the services within the system. And we get a weekly report that goes out to everybody within the engineering group to let them know how they're performing. And, you know, there's various fruit flavored colors that are assigned to different things as you are successful or not. And that's, I mean, for us, we don't have enough of the infrastructure to be able to get down to the lower level metrics. And really, if we're able to maintain the uptime, which we've been pretty good about, that's sufficient for us to meet our SLAs, and then the business is happy. So we're kind of simple in that respect, but we do measure a lot. I mean, when something goes wrong, everybody's phone gets active and a lot of things happen, but it really comes at, there's thresholds, who gets notified, et cetera, but there's not a lot of metrics in terms of how are we performing in terms of MTTR, et cetera.
Okay. How about Thor, Vijesh, either of you?
I've never heard of that book, but we do. So I'm actually interested to read it, just to be blunt.
Great book.
So release frequency, yeah. So release frequency is definitely something we orient around, and we measure kind of the health of our development teams and our Scrum teams and so on and also kind of DevOps progress on the various DevOps projects with release frequency, and then cycle time. Cycle time's a big one for us that we do measure and track pretty closely. It's just part of kind of our overall agile processes. But thanks for mentioning the book.
Okay.
Looking forward to reading it.
Yeah, from my end, several different things. So we have, with text messaging, we have to make sure we have pretty high reliability as far as delivery goes, and so uptime is definitely one of the key metrics, that we have. We also have basically just general, if we do have a downtime, how long before recovery, or if we can actually have a failover state, right? We can fail over to a different system or server or something that we can get to and just get the system back up. So we measure mean time before we're back up. That's essentially the high level of it. I think similar to what William and Thor are saying, there's a lot of pager duty and a lot of alerts and deep visibility, like I mentioned earlier, that's being run. And of course, all the systems light up and phones light up the moment something goes wrong. Everybody starts jumping on it. Definitely, Tony, we talked about this in our earlier conversation, but I think one of the things this touches on is when something happens, what do we do, right? And that's always this idea of like a couple of type of people that we have within our company that definitely help. I have a few people within our team, which I almost consider the cowboys, and they're the ones that can jump out in front of the problems, And I know during the startup days, there's a lot of people that will jump on grenades, but over time, you kind of figure out, okay, there's some wizards you have that are kind of seeing the floor, looking at it from a tower, and you have a few cowboys in the field that are there to attack these problems. And I like to have the two personalities within my team at all times. And I think that definitely helps as well, having the people that actually respond to these things. It is not exactly metrics driven, but it's definitely something that makes a big difference in how these systems perform.
Cool. Hey, Todd, thanks for the question and the pointer to accelerate. That's a good call out. We're gonna move on. And speaking of talent and teams, I'd like to move on to that because that's a perennially top pain point for us as CTOs. And we were just talking about all these skill sets, and actually one of the comments I saw about infrastructure as code is trying to find skill sets around that area is really challenging right now. And actually one of you is even talking about how you somewhat grow your own in that because it is so hard to acquire. But Josh, I know you've got like 75 people or so, something like that. Can you talk a little bit about key ingredients for you? You already talked, cowboy versus, what's the other one?
Wizards, right?
Wizards, okay, yeah. That's right. But talk a little bit about how you have sort of addressed, organizing in a way that is going to make you successful from a talent perspective. And then I'm going to kind of want to get some other perspectives here from Bill and Thor in a second.
Great, yeah. So luckily, with our system, we don't need a very, very specific talent in the sense like I don't need literally like expert in machine learning in a certain way or anything like that. I think most of the software we're building for our product is fairly like general, right? And so I think that benefits me because talent-wise, I don't have to go look for a needle in a haystack, which I think is probably the hardest thing to do in engineering. There's no way around it. That's just going to be hard. Right. And sometimes you're going to have to pay quite a bit for that. Right. And that's just the way it is. Right. And so one of the things I kind of, think about when it comes to talent and process, right, is just I like building on something that works. Right. And so, take something that works and build on top of it. And I just like Scrum and Agile as a process. It really helps me. I mentioned earlier, it's, we have a team that gets together. They decide as a team, we're going to work on these things. They score all of those things. And it's pretty obvious when you do it as a team that, hey, you know, somebody's not scoring things appropriately, or if maybe the score is too high, score is too low. It's great because that creates that accountability that I think all of us look for when we're managers and leading a team, right? So during sprint planning, everybody's sitting around and they're saying, hey, you know, this is what we estimated, and they're checking against one another. So we know that nothing's really going out of bounds, which is great. And during sprint retrospectives, we're showing demos and we're actually reviewing the work that's been done. So again, you know, this gives the opportunity for the team to showcase themselves and really get a win and demonstrate all the work they've done. And that to me is one of the key ways to actually just make a really high functioning team, right? Safe team that's able to work on a mission that's clear, that's able to kind of have a safe environment to do so, have elbow room to actually think through the problem and execute against the problem. And I try not to put any deadlines or anything on the team, but I do have this structure of accountability where we want to make sure the team knows what we're trying to hit. There's a clear metric that they're trying to hit. And we measure that. At the end of the sprint, they say, this is a metric we were trying to hit. This is where we are at. And they know, do we need to double down? Do we need to rethink how we're doing this? And the idea here is that we, you know, hire great talent. We want to encourage them to use those skills to help us, right? And so really push a lot of the onus of how these things work onto the team. And so that's a key part of how people and culture stuff works within us. Something else that's kind of important for me is just kind of the baseline culture. I think a lot of times engineers look for the team to be part of. And, you know, I think everybody here have at some point in your life have probably done the engineering death march where there's looming deadlines, there's extensive, you know, maybe technical debt that you're dealing with, and you have goals and things that you have to hit. And that death march, I think every engineer has at some point been there. And, you know, I really don't like that kind of environment for people to come into. And I want to create an environment where I think engineers can see, hey, I'm not going to be part of a death march here. There's no, you know, deadline that's looming along with technical debt and everything else that's going to cause me a tremendous amount of stress, right? And so really crafting the team in an agile way, giving them missions, you know, remove deadlines, actually use the Scrum process to actually learn how they function. These are all things that really help me devise a really great team. Obviously, a great HR team for recruiting talent is also kind of necessary. I'm not sure how many recruiters and stuff you work with, but it's been, I would say it took me a good 6 to 7 years to find a group of people that I can work with that actually get me the talent that I want. That includes outsourcing talent. So I have a team in Ukraine that's been wonderful. I have a team in Argentina that's been wonderful. I have a team here in Pasadena as well as Santa Monica. And so a lot of disparate areas, but we were able to find these pockets where we can scale and scale in different ways, right? So I know if I needed a whole new squad, 15, 20 people, I can probably scale that in Ukraine a lot faster than I could here, right? And so there's different areas that I know I'm able to push on and some gears that I'm able to pull so I can appropriately resource the company.
Awesome. Bill, I'd like you to talk about, you know, talent, but I think in our pre-conversation, you had a couple really interesting areas. So first of all, retention, and then talk about sort of remote. And so, you know, I'd love to get your perspective on those two topics.
Sure. So there's a couple different things. First, as Tony mentioned early on, my previous company, Passenger, I had an LA-based engineering team, and I had a Palo Alto-based engineering team. And that was very interesting to learn the dynamics between the two of them. And one of the things that came out really quickly for me was in Los Angeles, quality of life is much more important than size of paycheck, which was very, very, very much more important than in Palo Alto. And it took me a while to really understand those two differences because I'm talking to people of roughly similar caliber talent. So when I brought that here, I made sure to think about those kinds of things because I'm not in a position, we're doing the kind of stuff that is not as intense as Google and Facebook, et cetera, but it's using the same kind of technology, the same kind of people who get called by the same kind of recruiters, and I can't pay the same kind of money. So I have to find other reasons for people to be able to you know, come and stay with us. And this is across the board because we do a lot of different research. We're a research company, so I do have a lot of specific stuff that I can't outsource. One of the first things we did is a sliding window. And the sliding window is this concept of you live in Los Angeles, traffic sucks, okay? That's fine. But also for us to do synthesis, we need to be together now and then. It's super important to get on a whiteboard. And one of the things that I've really learned over the years, having been in a open source startup Apache project a while ago, is that the engineers can get very intense and very passionate about what they believe in, but that's great as long as they have the ability to have the conversation with each other as humans. And while we have all these great whiteboard things out here and these tools like we're on right now to be able to talk with each other, when you're sitting there trying to synthesize something and someone believes strongly in A and someone else believes strongly in B, in my experience, the way you get to that is on the whiteboard going through, but you have to have the human interaction with it as well, because you have to see they're kind of kidding, or they're intense on this, maybe I back off a little bit, etc. Because that's how humans interact. So to do that, what I did is you can come in any time of the day and leave any time of the day, as long as you're here between about 11 and 2. Okay, so I have people who drive in from Ventura and then Valley and from Irvine, because they're horrible drives normally, but they're able to do it because they're driving in at 11 o'clock and going home at 8 o'clock at night. And in doing so, they're able here to spend the synthesis time, because the other thing I had learned in previous organizations is that remote is great for execution. And so things that we can do, on our own, we know what we're going to do. We have the goals in mind. We're checking each other, is like Vijesh just said. There's all sorts of ways you can have metrics, et cetera, for being able to see how you're performing. Those kinds of things are easier to monitor that way, but for the census, we have to be here. The other thing that I've really taken to heart is the millennials are ascending. And the reality behind that is that the whole concepts of, okay, every 6 months, we're going to sit down, we're going to have a conversation with you about how you're performing, and we're going to check this box and fill this out and give you a 1 to 4 score. But doesn't work, right? They care a lot about the quality of life, but also respect and the ability to feel like they're heard is huge. So one of the things I did is break my teams down into small teams. Each team has a team lead, but the organization is very flat. Even though people have different titles, anybody can talk to anybody else with any other idea. You just need to be prepared to defend your idea. And the first thing I tell everybody when they're onboarded, there are such things as stupid ideas. I come up with a lot of them, okay? Don't be afraid to tell me when I do one, right? But I also want you to be able to speak up. And by being able to be heard, for a lot of these people, that is a huge feedback for them. And what I've noticed over time is that it's also helped them, the feeling of community has grown, right? Because now they realize they're saying something without the risk of I'm saying it to somebody too far above me or below me or who won't respect me. So it's been quite a change, because again, I'm sure all of you have been through the process of the more rigid HR type things, but I have been able to get the company to come around to the idea of is we do check-ins regularly. How are things going? And from that standpoint, we kind of do a measure and a read in a conversational way, as opposed to you're being tested by us. Did I get a good score or did I not get a good score? That kind of stuff is gone.
And what about feedback itself and kind of the style of feedback and things like that?
In terms of the style of feedback from top down?
Well, from any level to, to
okay,
peers,
fine, sure.
to subordinates.
Yeah. So on the quote top down side, basically the evaluations that go on with the team leads, because they're much more of a mentor, because of the situation of I can't go out and find a very seasoned data scientist who's really good at machine learning and has a great handle on NumPy and pandas, right? We grow these people. So the team lead is somebody who I trust and I kind of delegate the basic design and management of his team. We'll sit there and work with these people and on their pace, bring them up to speed, which is appropriate. Now, the pace by which somebody's expected to come ramping up over on the R&D team compared to somebody in the UI team is completely different, which is why, again, I allow them to have the culture of their own team. And each of our teams have different cultures. And I've worked with the team leads to help them identify what their culture is. So when they're looking for new people, we get people who fit in there, not somebody they think that they're impressing me or anybody else in any other group. So it's a lot easier to have 4 or 5 happy people working together than 40 and 50 happy people working together. There's just too much difference in terms of the personalities. In terms of bubble up, I like to, I mean, it's kind of cliche, but my door's always open, but I walk around and I talk to everybody every day. And it's very simple. How are things going? What are we working on, et cetera? And I know I don't want to sound like the guy in Office Space with a coffee mug killing time, but there is an element of he knows I'm here. I have the ability to talk to him, and I continually am breaking down barriers. I'm open to talk. I'm open to talk. I'm open to talk.
That's great. And Thor, I know that developing talent resonates for you, but you've got a even a slightly different take on that I thought was really interesting. Can you share a bit of that? Well, like the kind of talent you're looking for and what your expectations are around them and how you can, sort of help them.
Yeah. I mean, it's so. I would just note, to hear Vijesh and Bill, talk about people. It's just interesting. I think that's the most passion, I've heard, and I kind of, in terms of everything we've been talking about, so I do think for us in this technology space, it really is just all about the people. There is no technology. There's nothing that's getting built. We're not mining for coal. So I do think people is tremendously important. I don't know that we have a unique take on it. I would say, from an environment perspective, what Vijesh said about a safe environment really resonates with me. I use that word all the time. I just feel like you want people, give people a safe place to land, and a sort of confidence and just a feeling of safety, in their work and in their day. And the millennium are ascending. Yeah, I had a very different, early in my career, very different experience. I'm at a loss.
I guess. Well, I guess what I remember, and it's been a few days since we talked, so I may have this wrong, but you were talking about sourcing people who maybe are going through a career change or.
Oh yeah.
So and that's a non-traditional hire, right?
Yeah. So for us, diversity is a big value, just organizationally, and for me personally. And for me, that diversity kind of does come in that flavor as well, which is that person who might not have had a traditional background, or might have gotten a technical degree and done something else, or is interested in a career shift. And I just think it's a great mix. I think there's a lot of value in that kind of person that's got an academic background and 4 years of professional development experience. But I think it's a great mix to also have those people who are coming in who, have some very different backgrounds and are kind of bringing that to the table. Thanks for reminding me, Tony.
No problem. Yeah. I got really worried there for a second that I had you confused with somebody else.
No, I've got like 10 other things I can say about people, but no, that is a good one. And I think it's just so interesting for people to have like a mix of backgrounds in an environment, and it helps us.
Well, it definitely
really
leads to stronger teams based on everything you see out there. On the other hand, developers are such a funky group that they can have all sorts of weird expectations about what their peers are, and so it can be challenging in some technical groups. I do want to ask before we jump off of this topic. Tad asks, "Are your leads managers able to read and write code?" Just quickly thoughts on that.
Yes, on my front. So what I've done is, here's my expectations. So a Scrum team will be composed of at least a Scrum Master, product owner, and some group of engineers, along with QA and SRE or DevOps, right? And out of that group, I expect all of the engineers to be able to code. Not the Scrum Master and product owner, obviously. And QA, I expect them to do some automation work along with their acceptance testing and general testing criteria that they have. But yeah, when I look at that leadership layer, definitely the tech lead for any Scrum team has to be a programmer. When I go above that, every 4 to 5 teams will have one director. The director is somebody I expect to be fully capable of programming. I do not expect them to code, but I do expect them to review like pull requests, to review kind of architectural diagrams, things like that. And I want to make sure that they have enough knowledge in their past that they can do at least the quick sniff test, make sure that the team is actually organizing the projects properly, and make sure that there's actually alignment within the team on how we're building something. And so that's kind of the process I've been using. Definitely not at the director level. Beyond that, VP and CTO, my engineers have all told me I should not be touching code anymore. And that's a natural progression. It started off as, I coded everything, and then I wish I could code, and then now my programmers won't let me code. Right? That's kind of where I'm at right now.
Bill, Thor, how about you? Are you similar in terms of expectations?
Yes, same thing.
Yeah,
my team is, again, they have to mentor. They have to code and they have to get at it.
Great. Okay, so we're gonna change gears here. Talk about probably one of my least favorite topics, which is, but increasingly important. Don't get me wrong, but I just don't necessarily enjoy this as much, and that's security and compliance. And so I'm going to, Thor, look to you to talk a little bit about it. Obviously, healthcare, probably one of the most regulated industries out there. And how is sort of security and compliance changing for you over the past few years, and kind of, anything you're doing sort of differently to address it?
Yeah, I would say I feel like the tools in that area are really maturing. We think about security as a kind of holistic approach, right? So not just a set of tools that are kind of sitting on our production environments, but, culturally, developer training, and then across the organization, in terms of just inuring people as social engineering approaches and things like that, is a huge part of what we do. And then, the frameworks, right? High trust and, your SOC 2 kind of audit frameworks are also a huge focus for us organizationally, both from the arguable value, the practical value that you get from those, which does exist, and then of course the just the kind of stamp of approval that helps from a sales perspective. But yeah, I would say for us, it's just really that kind of it's a culture, and it's a culture. Yeah.
And I know AWS has kind of become an increasing part of most of our, well, for us who are using AWS as a key part of the delivery, that's become a big part of how you practically, and also from a answering security assessment questionnaires, you address a lot of things. I'm assuming that's true for you guys as well.
It is. I would say it's a nice check mark to have, but in my experience, your high trust and your SOC 2 type audits do go well beyond that. So we do get something there, certainly, because we don't have to deal with like the physical security of the data center, and that is a big component that we just no longer have to deal with. But I think our recent high trust audit was 300 controls that we were kind of directly addressing. So I would say AWS is going to be very helpful. We're expanding internationally next year, and so their expertise in a wide variety of kind of international geos is going to be a real benefit from that perspective.
Okay. So guys, we are quickly running out of time. I'm going to be doing this as kind of speed rounds here. So Vijesh, anything jumps to mind that you want to add on the security and compliance front?
All I can say is that oftentimes it's somebody's third job. The best way to get attention to it is make somebody's first job security. And it's very, very critical. Like Thor said, it is a culture. And at some point, you have to really show the business side of your company and the finance side of your company that the risk they're taking is bigger than the cost savings that they're trying to achieve by ignoring security. And I think that's a critical part of us being able to push the necessity for security. But I definitely look at 3 or 4 areas. Obviously info security is one area that I want to make sure I address. The risk assessment, making sure there's vulnerability management, and then there's also incident management and penetration testing are a couple of other areas that I try to make sure that we have like check-ins very often, right? And it's somebody's first job and it's not their last job, and so we all pay attention to the news there.
Excellent. Bill.
Yeah, so real quickly, I would respond to Thor's comment that physical security is a pain in the butt. Yes, I live it. Still talking about who can access what through what level of third and second, but. Otherwise, I mean, I'm in agreement. Fortunately, the one nice thing about being in the world of dealing with advertising type data, it's not health data. So we do get a little bit of a hall pass on certain levels of it. I don't have to have a lot of the acronyms. But in terms of the PII stuff itself, we're still on the same hook. I just get the added benefit of who can physically access my servers.
And I think you also were talking about ADA requirements you're having to deal with as well, right?
Yes, which were incredibly difficult for surveys, because we're asking people to, watch something, listen to something, comment on it, and then interact with controls. And I mean, for instance, we're just now moving our surveys over to mobile phones. We spent 5 months working on how your thumb works on a phone compared to how you use a slider with a mouse. You introduce things like ADA to that, and all of a sudden you have someone who's going to be a complete outlier. And going back to the machine language, the machine learning world is going to look like some sort of bot or weird aberration with a hardware error or something and probably get tossed from the survey. So it's a very tough challenge for us, and we're trying to figure out ways around it. But practically, there's just some things I'm not sure we're going to be able to solve.
Yeah, that's definitely a tough one. The reason I complain about this whole area is I've got a lot of engineering work I need to get done, and there's a new privacy reg coming out, all the time. States are passing new stuff. There's some new sort of expectation of, by some standards body. So this stuff is a moving target all the time. And I work primarily in smaller orgs. And so I don't have somebody whose first job or their primary focus is security. So it's a painful thing for me. Okay, let's talk about legacy to modern architectures, which is something that, given the speed of how fast things become legacy these days, which can often be, a couple of years later, you're calling it legacy. And Vijesh, I know you had to do, rebuild the plane while it was flying. Can you talk a little bit about kind of how you did that? And then I'm going to get Thor and Bill to just briefly comment.
Yeah, I've done this a couple of times in my career, taken a system and then hit some scaling challenges, and at some point decided that the best option was to rewrite or completely replace the system. And I'm sure many of you have gone through similar things. But the first thing, I think about is, how can I keep the business alive, right? That's all first and foremost in my head, right? And so number one, the existing system has to survive the process, right? So everything I can do, initially my entire process is, can I get the existing system? Can I fix things that are monumentally broken, right? So that I can keep the system alive while I'm changing the plane mid-flight, right? So you want to make sure the existing system is enough that it gives you a runway. Because without that runway, you're just in a firefight mode on the existing system and trying to build new stuff, and it's just not going to work, right? And I've had that experience in multiple times, and it just doesn't help. And so the best thing I've found is get the existing system and start patching it to a place where you're confident it'll survive to a rudimentary degree that you can work on this new process that you're doing. Right now, with our, I think every migration is going to be very detailed, and you have to kind of figure out what the challenge is in that particular migration. For us, it was very simple. We had a very old code base. It was written in Zen framework, PHP. We acquired this company, and we hit pretty quickly. We hit those scaling challenges. And the first thing we did was, okay, we have this big monolith. We're just going to tear out the parts of the system that we knew were very broken. And so we actually carved those out and created microservices for those, and just converted the old system to have APIs to these new microservices. The great thing there is those microservices will be able to last after the migration, right? So we're not building something that's going to waste. We're building something that can help the existing system survive the migration plan. And then the second thing we did was, okay, modern technologies are great. Actually, a lot of our UI UX technologies like Angular, React, and so on are actually really wonderful. Even mobile technologies are great, because pretty much all the technologies designed are creating a really good user experience with API that hits the back end. And so if you have a really clear API, life becomes pretty easy for web development, mobile development, things like that. And so the first thing we did was, hey, let's take our existing legacy app, and we're gonna shore it up and make sure the foundation can last the migration. And then number two, we're going to actually take the UI and make it into a JavaScript-based UI. That way we have a very clear and defined API for the backend that we know what we have to do as far as the system migration goes at that point. And so the first thing we did was just take everything, move it over to Angular in our case. And so we switched over to Angular. We got a really clear API that was defined, and all of a sudden it was it was pretty much a spreadsheet. You have a list of APIs. Are they mapped over to the new system, or are they not? There's definitely this initial period of migration where people kind of waffle around. This is the area that I think you have to be very careful of. In the beginning is like, oh, let's get the foundation running, right? Which database are we going to pick? If you're starting from scratch, you're using some existing systems, you might say, hey, let's get authentication to work and some of that stuff, the back end, pieces, plumbing and all that stuff to work. And in those areas, people can definitely cycle and try to overdo it. So I caution everybody to say, always, again, go back to the business and say, am I providing wallet value, right? Don't overcycle on back end stuff that you think you're going to over optimize for the future or anything. Really keep the team on track to make sure that they're hitting the business priorities for the migration. And so for us, keeping that team on track. We were able to get a new system kind of humming and functioning underneath. We had several milestones. We kind of did a phased approach. And so number one, we matched the APIs and we created a little proxy layer. That way it's very quick for us to map the API to the new system or the old system. And so it was very quick for us to do a little flip and have people use the Angular user interface and all of a sudden flip to a brand new backend anytime we wanted, right? And we could just flip that with that proxy layer and send APIs across. And so this is kind of the process we've been using. And then obviously one of the harder parts is once you flip that system, you have to migrate user data and migrate existing users. That sometimes is challenging because along the way you may change features, you may change the way the product work. And so there's some things that you have to just re-educate the customer base on. And that's natural, it's gonna go along the way. Some things along the way you're probably gonna improve as well. And so there's things you can tell the customer base, hey, we have a new system to send you to, there's all of these things are much better than they were before. Right, and so that's a great way to actually convince people to start switching early. Gives you a beta period that you can try out the new system, test it, harden it before you start moving the rest of the users all over. And so this process has been multi-year. Generally, in the past, I've seen 2 to 3 years in a big system migration is fairly common, at least for me. You know, I haven't seen many go much faster than that. You know, but yeah, it's been challenging, but at the same time, I think if you follow a systematic method, it usually can function successfully. The other thing to mention also is, you know, how much effort do you apply? I think you know you get a lot of pressure sometimes from management and everybody. Can you just, you know, spend lots of money and get it done in 3 months instead of 2 years, right? And usually the answer to that is no. You know, and I think you have to stand pretty still on that one because, you know, adding more heads to these kind of problems usually makes it worse. You have to onboard and train people. They don't know how the system works. Usually starts becoming slow and actually increases lots more defects and all of those things start increasing as well. So you definitely need like a steady, consistent effort. That's what I usually tell my team is, you know, we have about 300 to 400 story points to spend, right? This is the velocity of our teams. So let's put 400 points on the table and say, where do we want to put these 400 points? You know, let's put 50 of them on this migration piece. Let's put 50 of them on this product piece for the business because we really need that. But really make a conscious decision with the business that at any point in time, this migration will always be X number of points, right? And it should be at least 20% of your staff, if not more. You know, but if you can actually just say, hey, 30% of my points are always going to be migration, it's great. You know, now you can have consistent approach, you can have consistent delivery, and you start really burning down that goal that you have.
Yeah, and one of the other things that often is kind of a trap for us as CTOs that goes along the line of like, if I gave you a ton of resource, is they say, well, you know, if you didn't do this incrementally and just did this all as a big bang, you know, could you just put all your resource and get it out sooner? And it's always a trap. It's so much better to take the strategy you're taking where there's these incremental, you know, sort of evolving, rolling development of it as opposed to trying to big bang the thing, which, you know, almost invariably comes out with big problems and is disappointing. So,
yeah, just one small thing to add to
yep.
that, like it's, you know, the interesting thing is we went to Angular first, you know, and the thing was, it was great because we got that API layer, but the reasoning behind it was very simple. You know, the business unit was telling us our user experience is not great. We need to improve it. Well, the fastest way to get a better user experience was us to, first of all, get rid of the legacy architecture, switch to Angular. All of a sudden, the user experience started improving, and without even migrating the system. So you see, like I was able to get to the business goal without actually migrating the system, just by listening to what the needs were, right? So switching to Angular got us what we wanted for the business side, while I was able to do what I needed to do on the back end. That's
great. That's great. And speaking of Angular, I'm going to jump to our last topic of the evening, which is evolving languages and frameworks. For those of you who aren't too much into different development languages and things like Angular versus React, the remarkable thing is a lot of the words we're about to use didn't even exist 5 years ago. And yet we're talking about them as if they're old hat and everybody should know what they are. But Bill, I'm gonna have you just kind of take this one and talk a little bit about the evolution you've gone through and a little bit of the rationale for what you've done, and why the heck are we changing all of our languages and frameworks all the time?
Sure. Really quickly, one of the reasons why is because it's cool. And that sounds silly until you realize that I'm going to say 25% of my technology decisions are aligned with doing things with the cool kids, because if I don't do that, my retention is going to fall apart. And so, like, one of the things we brought up in the topic side, like, is Java dead? Java's not dead. It's a very viable language. You just, as long as you ignore all the license threats from Oracle you're getting constantly about what you're doing with it. But the reality is it's very hard to find people who are domestic programmers that are interested in doing Java. It's not something that has a lot of mind share right now. So what am I seeing out there? You're seeing a million things in the JavaScript world. So we all know you can't build a website effectively without JavaScript, because it's going to drive the vast majority of your front end, right? But then what was happening with these people is, hey, we want to be able to talk to an API that makes more sense to us, not sense to the data guys on the back, because they're always trying to give it to us and make us iterate, and it's going over the wire lots of times. Hey, there's this thing called Node.js out there. We can build server stuff with JavaScript, okay? And then that should be the dun dun dun. But the reality is for those of you who aren't familiar with JavaScript, it's a very loose language. I mean, it's very easy to pick up and do, but the problem with it is that for people who are trying to make complex things or things that you have to maintain over time, it's very hard to do so. So lots of companies have jumped in with frameworks. So you hear about Angular or React or Knockout, which I still have some laying around. These are kind of like exoskeletons that you pack around the outside of your JavaScript, so you have some sort of reusable mechanism for saying, oh, this is how we should do this, is how we should do that. Is it enforceable? Kind of, but people can always sidestep around it. But that said, if you're looking at the kind of the code camps out there, like Thor was talking about, bringing in people who may be doing transitions from different jobs or backgrounds, etc. When we've done some of that, right? You get the people who've spent 6 weeks in code camp and they come out and what can they do? Hey, I know React, right? I got it. This is me. I can do this. I can do cool stuff over here. And if they look like they have the aptitude and the desire, it's like, yeah, come on board. Well, that means we need to get serious about React, which we have done. And it's interesting. Was it something where I would have sat down with a couple of my leads and said, hey, what's the future of Java? You know, what's the future of UIs, et cetera? React? No, it's just something where this is where we're seeing the mind share going. This is where we're being able to find people and there's interest in it. Likewise, on our backends, because we aren't able to find the Java people, and also because we're moving into containers, Kubernetes is becoming more important for us. How things behave in a virtual and container world are more important to us. Java is not good at that. And the reason Java is not good at that is because of the virtual memory, which was always a real benefit up front, but it's what I call seagull memory. And by that, I mean, when you launch Java, you don't say effectively how much memory, it says, how much can I have? It's mine, right? I may not be using it, but it's mine. Well, things like Golang are very, very efficient. Google churned this thing out, and its ability to work with multi-threading is astounding. We're able to do things with it we didn't think were possible. I was actually thinking that guys were cheating when they gave me the results. And it's very tight and lightweight. But also equally as important is I can find someone who's a Java programmer or a Python programmer or any other, a Ruby guy, right? And I say, well, would you be interested in learning Go? And it's like, yeah, I am, right? Because it's a cool kid thing. And I'm not chasing them just because they're fun and you know they're providing entertainment for people, but we're trying to balance something that's taking us to the next level with something that people want to work on, and that's helping me loop all the way back around to our original thing of retention. And so I can pay somebody what I can afford if they're willing to go through the process of learning something and then be held accountable for it after a reasonable period of time. And after they do that, they kind of develop an affinity for us because we're a likable lot. And it's worked well. My retention is very, very good right now, and I'm very happy about it. So for me, the JavaScript thing is something that we're going to have to learn to live with because it's everywhere. It's used for a lot of things. And as much as it's not a very structured language, it's a language that's going to bring people in who want to have interest in, and particularly people coming in new to the industry who don't have classic backgrounds in programming. That's
awesome. So I apologize because we're supposed to be done at 7:30. We're a couple minutes over, and I'm using the old cheat here that every software engineer knows well. If you're late, you just start throwing features out. So I apologize. We didn't get to all the great stuff that Thor and Vijesh and Bill had talked about in the pre-meetings, but great stuff, guys. Really appreciate it. That was really interesting stuff, and I hopefully people were appreciating the chat during this last little bit. because there's several new things that I'm not even aware of. I'm going to have to go look up a Micronaut. So, but in any case, Roger, I appreciate the invite again this year, and this is great.
Tony, great evening. Thank you so much for bringing these people together. It's been fascinating as usual. And Anilu is going to kind of take the next step.
So
Anilu?
thank you, Tony, and all the panelists for joining today's event and for all the useful information. So I just want to take a few more minutes, maybe 5 more minutes. We just want to inform our attendees that we have some events coming up for the month of November and December before we wrap up this year. You can find information on our website on AITPLA. So we have our next event is coming up on December 9th with Dr. Gleb on the topic of neuroscience of IT. And there are 2 other events hosted by AITP Chicago. So you can find information about that on our website.